It's Friday and time for a weekly focus on one particular country and its current issues. Today we turn to the US, where Linda Lee, a member of the New York City Council representing District 23, joins us live. Linda, it's great to speak with you again.
Hi, great. Thank you so much for having me.
Right, Linda, we had the pleasure of your company online late last November, right after your election. Now, you took office on the 1st of January this year. How has work been thus far?
It's definitely been interesting because I am starting a new job in the public eye versus just starting any normal job like anybody would. But it's great because now for myself, I finally get to have conversations with the mayor and the speaker of the city council, and as well as my other colleagues to try to actually get a lot of the policies and legislation done that I've been talking about for years after working in the community. So in that sense, it's very exciting.
Right. Linda, on a grave note, though, the wave of anti-Asian violence that swept the U.S. amid the pandemic persists there. In a more recent tragedy, about 2 weeks ago, I believe, a 35-year-old Korean-American woman was senselessly stabbed to death by a stranger who followed her into her apartment. Do tell us a bit about this brutal crime.
Sure. I have to say for myself personally, this one really hit home because she's not that much younger than me. And she was going home and I believe, was taking a cab because she felt like it'd be safer for her to travel home that way, and ended up, being followed into her apartment. Currently, right now, as it stands, I don't think that this particular crime is being investigated as a hate crime. But at the same time, I think we have to look at the overall picture of what's happening in New York City right now, because there are a lot of crimes now that are being committed towards Asian Americans, and I don't think that's a mistake. I don't think it's unintentional. I think it started with the previous president who said China virus and made it okay for people to feel like they could come out with this hatred towards the Asian community. And so you see this pattern and what has happened over the last few years, with the Asian community. And, the crimes against Asian Americans have gone up more than 300% since the pandemic started. And it's not a coincidence. I think that particularly Asian women and Asian seniors are the ones that are being targeted because we're seen as the most vulnerable or weak. So I think for our communities, we're feeling frustrated, we're feeling scared. We understand that not every crime that is committed towards Asian Americans are considered hate crimes, but at the same time, I do think we need to recognize the fact that it has increased significantly.
Right. And in response to that repulsive reality, Linda, many have taken to the streets to raise awareness about assaults aimed at Asian Americans. I understand one group ran 35 miles around Christina Lee's apartment in honor of her life. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of advocates, there's a lot of advocacy that's happening right now. I think the outpouring of support that we've seen is tremendous. And I think that's one thing that we have to hold on to, is that we have to make sure that, we're uniting and we're building bridges, and that we're not creating walls, and that we're supporting each other, because there have been so many people from all walks of life, all different communities, that have been showing our community support. And it's been really heartwarming to see. And so now on our side as legislators, I think we need to respond back as well and do what we can to make sure that people feel safe walking in the streets of New York City, because everyone has a right to feel safe. Everyone has a right to walk around and to be able to feel like they are not going to get attacked.
Linda, as you mentioned, according to police in New York City, attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders surged by 361% between 2020 and 2021. In that city alone, of course. How do you explain this sad reality?
Well, I would actually even argue it's probably higher than that, because I think what happens a lot in our communities is that we tend not to report crimes. I think traditionally our culture and the way that we grew up has taught us, keep your head down, mind your own business, don't cause too much trouble. But I think now is the point where we need to speak up. We need to defend ourselves. We need to unite ourselves with other communities. The other part to this that's frustrating is that when I was still working at KCS during the pandemic, I actually had a meeting with the district attorney's office because I wanted our staff at KCS to know what the process is to report a hate crime and also what is considered a hate crime. And what I found out through sitting with the district attorney's office is that the burden of proof is very high for something to be considered a hate crime. And now also what's happening is that people are getting around it by not verbally actually saying something that is full of hate or bigotry. So if someone doesn't say anything, but they just act physically, that's not technically considered a hate crime. So I think what we need to do is work with the district attorney's office. We need to work with city and state legislators to figure out, maybe the question is we need to redefine what is a hate crime. And we need to make sure that people feel comfortable because especially if you don't speak English, right? A lot of our community members don't speak English as a first language. So if there's someone, a senior, that gets attacked, they're less likely to report the crime because they have to repeat it over and over to the detective, to the officers. They have to get the written report down. They got to talk to the attorneys. They have to talk to the DA's office, right? So there's a lot of steps that make it very difficult and discourage people from the community to want to report. So I think we need to address that issue. And we also need to make sure that people in the community feel comfortable and safe to report these crimes and also that they're in language as well.
Right. And while you put into action those efforts, Linda, as you mentioned, many of the victims are women and the elderly. What in the meantime can they do to ensure their safety, that is, in the US then?
Yeah, I think there has to be a multi-pronged approach. I mean, I know that there are some Asian nonprofit groups out there, for example, that are doing bystander training. So how do we train our neighbors and peers who are on the street to come to the aid of someone who is being attacked, especially if they feel like it's being attacked, if they're being attacked in hate crime. So there's a lot of training that is happening, but also at the same time, I think what we need to recognize and realize is that New York City and state, for all the positive things that we have here, we also have a very broken system. And what I mean by that is that, if you look at the past couple of incidences with Michelle Go or Christina Yunali, for example, or other folks that were recently killed or injured, there's a lot of homelessness that's happening, for example, in New York City. And these people oftentimes have severe mental illnesses and they're not on their medication. So we need to address the homeless issue. We also need to address the mental health issue. And we also need to understand that these people are people as well, and they need help. And we as a city have failed them. And what's happening right now is that the people who need the homeless services as well as the mental health services are not being connected with DHS, Department of Homeless Services, or OMH, right? Like Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And also there's not the coordination that's happening with NYPD. One positive thing I will say is that the Mayor Eric Adams, did actually create an emergency team in the subways in particular, where it's a combined effort of NYPD, homeless services, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, to be able to, if they see people who are in the subways that are not mentally stable or who need homes, it's a way for them to actually get treated and for them to receive housing and supportive services that they need. So I'm really glad that that's happening right now. I think we need to really beef up those types of services so that there's a continuation, because right now everything's in a silo and separate. But what we need to make sure is that if you're on the street and you need services, how do you get from A to Z and it be a smooth process?
All right, and hopefully efforts to that end will continue. All right, Linda, as always, thank you very much for making the time to join us live with your thoughts.
Thank you.